So do any of you feel a week behind since we didn't have church last week? It's kind of funny. It feels a little different, doesn't it? Well, we're going to continue our series in what Christians believe, and we're going to look at how the world began. So that's an important thing. We're going to start at the beginning. So from Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then Romans chapter 1, verse 20 says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse." So when we start at the beginning, you might say that the first 3 words of the Bible have been questioned, debated, studied, talked about more than all the rest. In the beginning, God. In the beginning, God. And, it used to be that was an assumption that we kind of had. Growing up, I just always kind of remember thinking, God's out there. That's not so much an assumption that we can assume anymore, because lots of people believe lots of different things anymore. But even for us personally, no matter where we start, we have to look at that issue. In the beginning, God. And as we look at how the world began, let me find my sermon here. I had the insert, but okay, now we've got it. We really have 3 options, and there are only 3 logical options. Did you know that? We sometimes want to make things really complicated, and I'm not going to be preaching these things this morning to you as though you don't know them, but I'm going to do it to help equip you to make things simple that people have made complicated. And our first option is number 1, no God. No God. And that option would believe all that exists is not God. How many of you have ever run into an atheist? You talk to somebody, and I've had so many people come to me, "Pastor, I talked to somebody, they're an atheist." Okay. But it's like they're afraid of them or something. Definitely it's an option, but I really believe most atheists who I have actually talked to, they're not really atheists at all. They're just people who don't want to talk about God. It's a good way to say, leave me alone. To really look at it, atheism is anti-theism, anti-God, and they believe the existence of God can be disproven. They have convincing proof that God does not exist. So if somebody tells you that they're an atheist, ask them, "So what's your proof? What's your proof?" And most of the time they'll say, "Huh?" Because they're really not as much of an atheist. Now, I've read atheists that make the case. So there are real atheists out there. There's a few of them. Even often, they will eventually begin to question some of the things. There's a book out there. I haven't read it. I had it referred to me, but I haven't got a chance to read it yet. It's called "I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist." They believe in a godless material universe. The universe came into existence without a cause. It can be the Big Bang theory or the expanding universe theory, evolutionary theories that are unproven. They're still missing links, and the more they study it, the more they're missing. And yet it's politically protected. And I think that's what often is difficult for us. We're teaching our kids about Jesus, And they're learning about atheism, really. I remember in 7th grade, I don't know if you have this remembrance of the first time you ever encountered evolution. In 6th grade, we had a teacher who he would read from his Bible every morning, and, that was neat. I wasn't a Christian, but it was still, okay, he was reading from the Bible. That's something we do. And we would say the Pledge of Allegiance, and I think we would pray, and, at the beginning of every day. Well, the next year, I had science class, and I remember them handing out these charts. Now, remember, I was raised on a farm. They have these charts of all these things, and the dog becomes a horse, and, all these things, and finally, a monkey becomes an ape, and an ape becomes a human, and I'm looking at this, like, really? What kind of fairy tale is this? I thought it was kind of neat. Kind of like when you watch, a kid's movie. Not real, but neat. Fun, I thought we of course had to memorize it. And at that time, I just remember being a little kid thinking, this is pretty dumb. This doesn't happen. I never saw it. I was raised on a farm, and cows have cows. Horses have horses. It did not match with my own experience. And, often little kids kind of have that sense. But it basically believes that the universe and life itself is simply an act of random chance. That just nothing out of nowhere developed. And then if they can't really figure out how to prove it, you just add a couple billion years, and then anything can happen over, lots and lots and lots of time. The math equation for atheism. You ready? Nothing times nobody equals everything. Does that work for you? Nothing times nobody equals everything. Because that's essentially what they're saying. And they also believe in progression from disorder to order without a person or without a purpose. Does this work in real life? Does your house go from disorder to order without purpose? Which way does it go? From order to disorder, right? Einstein's theory of relativity disproves it, but so does your kid's room. In real life, things don't happen that way. They fall apart. They don't come together. That's just not the way that we see life working. There has to be a purposeful mind and an effort to change things. Erwin Lutzer says, the Big Bang Theory is like having an explosion in a print shop, and the result being a Webster's Dictionary. That's not how things work, right? And yet that's the approach that atheism takes. And yet many want to promote this belief in spite of the facts. And even as it gets disproven, and I've read atheists who admit that, it's really hard to prove all this stuff, but it still gets promoted. Freud would say it's wish fulfillment. We wish there was a God, so we've developed this concept. So we develop God instead of God creating us. Others would say it's delusional or irrational. You've probably heard that one. Insults, accusations of stupidity. A TV character said once, "I'd like to believe in God, but I'd have to leave my mind at the door." And sadly, you hear that stuff over and over and over again, and you start to feel like, well, am I stupid if I'm a Christian? Because that's the message that's out there. Making fun of the faith. One guy wrote concerning the victims of Hurricane Katrina, who were praying to God, and they kept going up to the attic and more and more and more. Super tragic situation. He said, concerning these victims, he said, they were praying in the attic as the flood rose. These poor people died talking to an imaginary friend. That was his conclusion. Vicious and hateful attacks sometimes, essentially bullying us into silence. Because if you want to talk about a creator, and there's more and more of that going on. Furthering a culture of doubt, because again, you keep hearing things and nobody dares speak of your faith. You hear things, well, don't talk about religion and politics. Well, yeah, don't talk about politics. It usually doesn't end up good. But how can you not talk about your faith? Now, that doesn't mean you need to be obnoxious. We've all met those, right? They're not being persecuted for... I heard somebody say one time, their guy was complaining about being persecuted for his faith. And he said, you're not being persecuted for your faith. You're being persecuted for being a jerk. There are those people, right? But, the author of life, the creator of everything that exists. Psalm 19 says, the heavens declare the work of your hands. I like to look outside at night. You see all the stars. There are so many amazing things. How do they keep burning? How does the sun keep burning and never run out of fuel? I don't know any way to make that happen scientifically or in my experience, except that there's an infinite God who created all this stuff. And, you look at the human body, there's so many things. And so, yet, these continue to be made fun of. And the goal, I think, is to make us ashamed to even start to say anything about that we have a belief in God. There was a guy in my church, actually his stepson. Several years ago, our drummer's stepson was in a lot of trouble, and he ended up having a suicide attempt where he tried to hang himself. And so I went in. He was an atheist. He'd been an atheist. Don't talk to me. I'm an atheist. All this kind of stuff. And he was on life support. He was in the hospital, and the family was having this decision whether or not to pull the plug. And he was, I think, 19. Man, your heart just broke for those kind of decisions. And so they asked me to come in, and I went in and prayed for him. God healed him. The next day, I walked in, and he was up talking, functioning fine against all medical expectations. And so I thought, you know what? I think I need to tell him why everything's like this. And so I told him, and he said, well, I'm an atheist. And I said, that's all right. And we started talking, and I said, well, let me pray for you. He says, I'm an atheist. I don't pray. I said, that's okay. I'm a Christian, and I do. Let's pray. And we did. And he ended up coming to faith within a couple months after that, because God saved his life. I mean, that finally sunk in that, wow, I tried to end it, but God kept me alive for something. And so there's got to be a reason for my life. No matter on your worst day, no matter what's going on, even when you feel like I don't have a purpose, nothing goes right, God has you here because he has a purpose. There's days I don't know what that is. We all go through that, right? But you know what? He has a purpose. And it starts, though, with the fact that God created everything that is. We've got to start there, because you can't pick it up afterwards. You got to start there. So our first option is no God, atheism, or there's a second part other than atheism. It's called agnosticism. And a lot of times people will say, okay, I'm an atheist, or, well, I can't prove God exists, so I guess I'm an agnostic. Which an agnostic means you can prove that you cannot know if there's a God. So, you studied that? So what is your proof that you can't know? And then you usually kind of get this, right? Usually both of those are ways that you say, I don't know. I don't want to talk about God. We had neighbors growing up that were atheists. And anytime anybody would have a prayer at school or any little thing, these people get all up in arms, go crazy, threaten, and cause all kinds of trouble. Until their son died. And of course, they didn't have anybody that they knew that was a pastor. So they called me in to do the funeral for the son, and then I did it for their parents. And it's funny how their belief in God changes when somebody dies. And I think a lot of times, people who even would say they're atheists, they really aren't. They're just somebody who they haven't really decided. They just don't feel like talking about God. Or maybe more accurate, they're mad at God. You ever get mad at God? You don't have to raise your hand. I'll raise mine, though. He's big enough to handle it. But a lot of times these people, they get mad at God, and so they say, I'm an atheist because God doesn't do what I want him to do, or he let me go through a bad thing or a hard thing that I don't understand. Okay, that's fair that he did that, but doesn't mean he doesn't exist. In fact, if they're mad at God, they're already assuming that he does exist, right? Because he's got to exist to be mad at him. The second thing, and we see some of this too, it's an impersonal God. All that exists is God. There's really two ways to get rid of God. Either deny his existence or make everything God. And you kind of end up with the same result. Okay, God's God, but so are you, and so is everybody else and everything else. But this is getting more and more popular as we talk about things like a connected universe, and there's too much evidence in science that there's some sense of purpose, because this stuff just doesn't make sense without some sense of connectedness and purpose. And so they come up with a generic, it's basically pantheism, everything's God. The origin of the universe is attributed to a universal mind, an intelligent presence. Even sometimes when we hear people say, the man upstairs, that's on the verge of this kind of, not really God, but something somewhere out there. This real nebulous thing, because it just doesn't make sense not to have any purpose behind it. It's the Eastern views of yin and yang and karma. We hear so much about karma. It's not that, Galatians chapter 6 says that you reap what you sow. You always reap later, you always reap more. So you do something bad, it does catch up with you, and God is a just God. Karma just says that sort of the world catches up with you. It just, what goes around comes around. And so we gradually absorb some of these things. And it's based on sort of the laws of the universe. It's basically the Lion King version of God. You watch The Lion King, and it's been a while. I watched it 1,000,000 times when the kids were little. But it's kind of this, connectedness. But there's no God. Mother Earth, and some movements are giving more and more validity to animals, to make us on the same level as animals. And essentially, there's no difference in this view between us and a rock and a plant. There's no human dignity that comes with this, because it's just sort of the food chain, and we're just all connected. So that's an impersonal God. And then finally, we have the Bible's view of God, a personal God, a God who exists, and a God who is personal. He has character. He has the ability to be reasonable, intelligent. He has the ability to command. He has morals. He's righteous. And I think some of these are reasons why people really don't want to talk about God. A lot of times it's like, if I admit that God's who he says he is, I got to admit that there are some things in my life that aren't quite right. Yeah. That's what Jesus came for. Because there's things in our life that aren't quite right. God says that about us. But often, that's why people resist. But God is personal. He created everything that exists. He did this purposefully and intelligently. He has the right to speak, and he does speak. Creation speaks of his existence. The Romans chapter 1:20 verse. God's invisible attributes have been clearly seen through what's been made. Clearly seen. I mean, I enjoy a little bit about science. I'm not a scientist, and, I can get out of my depth real quick. But when I look at the human body, you look at the human brain, even something as simple as our eye, that amazes me. The fact that I can see something with my eye, and I can reach out with my hand and touch it, and it's really there. How does that work? How do we pick up images like that? And I can understand it a little bit scientifically, but it still blows my mind. And the fact that that would happen by accident? Really? But creation, whether it's the heavens, whether it's the human body and all the complexities, our ability to heal ourselves, that's pretty amazing. Because, I've made things. I've worked on things. They don't heal themselves. My car does not heal itself. Something starts, guess what? It's going to keep getting worse, right? But our bodies fix themselves. That's pretty amazing. And so all the wonders that creation speaks, people are purposefully created in God's image. And that's the only way that we can really have any meaningful value, right? Because if we are created in God's image, that means from that infant in the womb to somebody who is elderly and maybe can't talk, can't move, can't do anything, they still have human value. Or that person who maybe never speaks a word in their entire life or never makes a step. They have human value. Because God created them. And, all of the people who talk about equality, without God, there's no basis. It's survival of the fittest, really. If you follow Darwin and evolution, there isn't any equality. Some of us are more fit than others, and we should trample on those that are less than us to survive. That's our job. That's not equality, right? But if you believe that God created us in his image, there's a reason to value everybody. And to value everybody the same. Doesn't mean that we are the same. God makes us incredibly different, and that's beautiful. But the value is always there. God gives everybody value at any age, at any stage in life, any mental ability. There's value. And sometimes, even when we feel most worthless, we got to remember God made us in his image. And so there's something incredibly valuable. So God's creation speaks of God's character. People are purposefully created in God's image and have value. God's word to us is inherently trustworthy. If we believe God created everything, it's not too much of a jump to believe that he's going to tell us about it. And if you study the Bible and if you study how it developed, it's incredible, the care that was taken. Once in a while you hear somebody come up with this thing, oh yeah, did you hear they found a new Bible over somewhere else and we've been reading the wrong one? It's like, really? Do you understand how many thousands of manuscripts from all over the world have been scanned and looked at to see, is there any little tiny scribal error in one, but that everything else, it's amazing and incredible the depths that people have gone to, that we have the background to know how trustworthy this word is. And it shouldn't amaze us that God who created us would speak to us. And he speaks to us in his word. He has authority over creation. God has the right to do what he wants to do. He's the only being who really can do anything he wants to do. Now, sometimes we have questions. That's normal. God, why did you do this way? I don't get it. And maybe some of you were taught that we're not supposed to ask why. Oh, never ask God why. That's not what really the Bible teaches. Because if David asks why all the time in the Psalms. Now, I might not get an answer. But in the process, I usually meet Jesus. And he lets me know that it's okay. I might not have the answer, but I find the truth. And so God has authority over creation. He is able to manage it the way that he sees best. And one day we will see like he sees and will understand. There's a story about a guy, true story. He and his wife and his kids were on a drive. And they're going out through the countryside. And his car quits. So he gets out and he starts looking at it and he says, oh boy, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's wrong. Well, a little bit later, this old guy comes up. Gets out of his car and walks over. He says, well, let me look at it. The guy's kind of reluctant. He says, sir, I don't think you understand. I'll take it to a shop. I'll have somebody take care of it, He says, well, let me look at it. He says, well, why should I let you look at it? He said, because I'm Henry Ford and I created this car. Okay. And that's kind of how God is with us. He says, I created this. I created you. Let me work with you. Let me help you. I know how you're wrapped. I know how you're made. And so when things fall apart, I can help you put them back together. And all we have to do is ask. But it starts with, first of all, looking and really realizing God created everything that exists. And once we start there, then it begins to unfold. And we'll get to some of the questions that if God created things, why do bad things happen? Or why are there problems in this world? And we'll get to some of those things. But we have to start with the reality that, you know what? God made everything. And I would encourage you, look around. And if you're uncertain, I've prayed with several people who were atheists, and I've challenged them to pray one prayer. God, if you're real, help me see it. Show me. Sometimes there's been dramatic answers to that prayer. Other times they just walk outside and look around and say, whoa, go for a walk in the woods, God's creativity just speaks. So if you're not sure, be open. Ask God to show you. But if you are sure, look around and enjoy it. Every time I look at something God created, Josh and Carissa keep texting me these little pictures. These ultrasound pictures. Reminds us how real God is. God can create something so incredible. Let's pray. Jesus, we thank you. Thank you that you know each one of us completely. Lord, I pray that you would bring that awareness to us. And Lord, bring that awareness to us on that day that we're discouraged. on that day that we're excited, on that day, Lord, that we are a little bit doubtful about something, God, would you just show yourself real and remind us that you created everything. You are our creator. Let us rest in that truth and let us follow you. In Jesus' name, amen.